Imagine a world where you knew that you mattered and you belonged. The people cared about you because we were so darn good at listening to one another, no matter how different we are. That is what Sidewalk Talk is doing by putting listeners on sidewalks all over the world so that we can practice the art of connecting. Join me, founder and director Traci Rubel, as I interview experts on the fine art of human connection and interview some of our volunteers who've been listening on the sidewalk and even some of the folks that we've listened to. And if you want to volunteer, consider joining us at sidewalk-talk.org. I tried so hard not to fangirl. Dr. Niobe Way is somebody who I have been stalking their work for so long. She's the professor of developmental psychology and the founder of the Project for the Advancement of Our Common Humanity at NYU. It's called PACH. So much to say about her that you can read more information about her. She's written so many books, but she is a true scholar in the field of human connection. Her work focuses on the intersections of culture, context, and human development with a very particular focus on social and emotional development, how cultural ideologies influence developmental trajectories. She has a project called the Listening Project through PACH. It aims to foster curiosity and connection in and outside of the middle school classroom across New York City. She's also created and teaches a core course for undergraduates at NYU called The Science of Human Connection. You're going to just make all kinds of links in your brain when you listen to this interview because she fundamentally explains the power of what Sidewalk Talk is doing when we're disrupting people on the sidewalk and really rehumanizing one another. Because she said, you know what? Our entire society is set up and designed to dehumanize. That our entire definition of a healthy human is an intellectual, masculine, stoic, individualized human. But that is actually not neurobiologically the definition of a healthy human. A healthy human is connected, needs people, and has emotions. You're going to have all kinds of light bulbs go off. So I might even get out a pen. This is going to be one to buckle up for, folks. Dr. Niobe Way. All right. So, Dr. Niobe, do I say Niobe?
Niobe.
Niobe.
Yeah,
Dr. Niobe Way. I should have known that because I've been fangirling you for like 3 years. I am so excited to get to be in community with you right now. I want to read a quote that has really inspired me from the PACH website of yours. May I?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I'm going to just read this to everyone listening. You'll understand why I'm a fangirl after I read this quote. Here it is. Our modern culture perpetuates dehumanizing stereotypes and maintains an individualistic mentality that privileges the self over relationships and individual success over the common good. These cultural patterns have led to a national crisis of connection in which people are increasingly disconnected from themselves and from each other. Yeah. So I've got to know how did you enter into this field of study? Like what started it for you? And yeah, what's kept it going?
Well, I just have to first say, since I've been doing this work for a long time, to see the way you're getting the work and the passion and the fact of the exactly work you're doing gives me the chills. It's so wonderful to have someone who's working, doing this work and gets it so deeply. So thank you is what I wanted to first say. Is thank you for that. Yay! Okay, so essentially the story is quite simple. Is that I in the 80s was a counselor for high school kids in Boston. And I started listening to boys and girls, young women and young men. And I was struck by young men and boys talking about their friendships and their need for friendships and their desire for friendships. And And there are struggles in friendships and all sorts of things. And I didn't expect it at all. I expected, taking my classes as a graduate student at Harvard, I was expecting, conversations about high risk behavior, about, school problems, home problems. I did not expect friendships. And so when they started talking about their friendships, I thought, what is going on here? This is not what I'm learning in my classes on adolescent development. I'm not learning anything about friendships. We're not even talking about friendships as a relationship that's core to human development. And so I became obsessed, Traci, with understanding what's going on with friendships among teenagers, and particularly among young men, because that was the story that was truly absent. And then I began a really a 30-year process of investigating relationships, particularly friendships, and began to hear a story, and the story that the boys tell us. And these are boys and young men from all over the world. I do work in China. I do work in the States. We've done work in India as well. And they tell us a story about who we are as human and what gets in the way and leads to a crisis of connection. But I didn't hear the story until I had been interviewing kids, mostly teenagers, sometimes younger than teenagers, 10 to 18. And I follow the same kids over many years. So that's the key, is that I'm following these kids. So I hear the change as they get initiated into culture during adolescence, the culture of manhood, quite frankly. So the idea is that I began to hear a story and that they were telling us that actually repeats the same story the larger body of science tells us. So I realized, oh my God, there's something going on here, and young people are telling us the story, and they're telling us what's the problem, and they're telling us the solution. And the story is very simple, and I'll sum it up. The story is, it starts off, the first part is who we are as human. Young people show us and underscore our relational nature, that we're born in relationship. And so we're born starving for connection with each other. And that's basically all we want in our lives, is to be deeply connected to other humans, and to connect to ourselves as well. And by connecting to ourselves, I mean seeing ourselves, feeling like ourselves are seen, but also feeling our own sense of humanity. And I always say, Traci, you cannot see someone else's humanity if you cannot see your own. So it has to start from the place that you have to see your own humanity for you to see another one. But the boys and young men and girls and young women teach us that and when you listen to them, because they talk about the ways in which they struggle to hold on to seeing their own humanity, etc. So we're born in relationships. That's the first part of the story. Second part of the story is we live in a culture that doesn't value the things that we most need as humans. And we know that because we're in a me culture. And so it's all about the self. It's all about separation. It's all about autonomy. Maturity is defined as autonomy. Maturity is, right? I mean, the interesting thing, Traci, which we always have to recognize, is masculinity and maturity are defined the same way. So we know we're in trouble. Because the idea is that it's defined as being self-sufficient and being your own person, not needing other people, not having to rely on other people, being emotionally stoic. All those things that we define as maturity and manhood actually get in the way of our humanity, which is our desire for relationships, because it turns relationships into something that's lame and essentially girly and gay. And in a homophobic, misogynist world, that's an insult. So the idea is that, and the culture is also premised on a set, which you were alluding to in the quote, is it's premised on a hierarchy of humanness, which I talk about a lot. So all our ideologies, patriarchy, capitalism, white supremacy, heteronormativity, all that is premised on a hierarchy of humanness, which puts some humans as more human than others. It's simple as that. It's all our ideological structures that I just referred to are premised on that hierarchy. So if you live in a culture that puts certain humans over other humans and that privileges the self over relationship, right, you're going to end up with messed up humans. Because it's going to decrease our capacity for empathy, for compassion, for relationships. And it's going to get in the way of us finding ways to nurture those relationships. So the idea is that it's literally, Traci, it's a clash between culture and nature. So we've created a culture that clashes with our nature. That's simple as that. And we've created a culture that is dehumanizing, that is privileging something rather than, I mean, I believe in autonomy and self and independence. Obviously, I'm a woman. I obviously believe in that. But the idea is that it's not more important than relationships. It's, the hierarchy is dysfunctional. The other thing I want to throw out is that, remember, we take another thing our culture does is we take what is human, right? Thinking and feeling is human. It's a human capacity, and we gender it. And we gender it, we race it, we class it, we sexualize it. We say thinking is for men and feeling is for women. I mean, we do as Western. When I say we, I mean most of Western culture. Americans lead the way in that way, in many ways. Is that we have created a culture that doesn't make any sense. So not only does it clash with our nature, it doesn't make any sense because we've given a gender to basic core human capacities. And core human needs. So we have this clash between culture and nature, and that leads to a crisis of connection, where we disconnect from ourselves, what we really want, what we really need, and we disconnect from others. And we're not able to see our own humanity, and thus we are not able to see the humanity of other people. The consequences, Traci, we see it every day. It's the violence, it's the suicide, it's the, sexual violence, police violence, mass gun violence. I mean, gun violence rather. Mass shootings is what I meant to say. And the idea is that violence directly comes from the crisis of connection. And how I know that is, once again, listening to young people. So you listen to not only people who have not committed violence, they talk about how if they don't have the relationships they want, the friendships, they go wacko. They feel depressed. They feel like they want to kill themselves. But you also hear it from the manifestos of school shooters. They tell you the exact story, Traci. They tell you the story that there's a beautiful, unbelievably beautiful, and very, very disturbing manifesto written by Elliot Rogers, who was a school shooter, a mass shooter in 2015. And he writes a manifesto that's about 180 pages, single spaced, and it tells his whole life story. And when I say beautiful, I mean it's beautifully written, especially the first half of it, in terms of articulating his emotions as a child, and then searching for friendships and not being able to find the friendships he has, and being bullied by lots of kids because he's on the shorter side in terms of height. And the devastation of being bullied for years and years and years and years, and always being blamed that he needs therapy rather than the culture needs to change. And that's a devastating thing to tell anyone, that the problem is you, not the culture in which you live. And that's what we do, Traci. We do that every single day. We say the problem is you, it's not the culture in which you're situated. And what happens is when you tell a person that's being bullied by a culture, which is what we're doing to each other, you tell them it's your problem and you need to go see a therapist. I have nothing wrong with being a therapist and seeing a therapist. But when it's only seeing a therapist, it makes them go crazy. And that's exactly what Elliot Rogers talks about. You see as he slowly gets essentially crazy, and he starts to say crazy things in the manifesto. But you see that beginning the disconnect with constantly being told again and again, it's his problem. It's not the problem of the culture in which he's embedded. So the crisis of connection leads to violence, pure and simple. And then the solution also comes from listening. The fifth part of the story also comes from listening to young people. The solution is to get back to who we are as human, right? Is to get back to who we are as human, but also disrupt the culture that actually caused the problem. And that's the part of listening that comes in that's so critical. And I hope you ask me about our listening project, because that is really the intervention. I'm not going to say an intervention. I'm going to say the intervention of actually beginning to listen to each other in new ways, so that we can get back to that first part of the story of who we are as human, and listening to ourselves and each other, and then begin to disrupt this pattern of, create a culture that's more in sync with our nature, put simply. Right? How do we create a culture that's more in sync with our nature? Well, we get back to actually what we want and need most in our lives, right? And that actually, we know this. We know the answer, Traci. It's within ourselves, and it's just a matter. And young people have reminded us of that. They haven't taught us that. They've reminded us of that, and that we need to take what they're telling us seriously. So the story is very simple in the sense it all goes back to listening to young people who tell us a story about who we are, what gets in the way, the problems and the solutions. And now we need to step up to the plate and say, okay, we know what to do. Now let's do it.
So I'm trying to withhold a scream of excitement listening to everything that you said so succinctly. So I will try to be a sane, rational human being here and not get overly excited. And yes, I will ask you about the listening project. I totally want to know what transformative interviewing is, but I have to share the story.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I'll say this about therapy. I have a real allergy to dogma, including psychological and psychotherapeutic dogma. And one of the first things that has happened for me is for so many couples that will come in to see me, I can feel the dehumanizing socialization of men, especially when I have couples of a certain age. And then they come into therapy feeling really confused about how to even be connected. And I don't want to say that it's always men, sometimes
Yeah.
it's women. I think it is getting better when I work with younger couples.
Yeah.
But the second piece is I'm like, this isn't your fault. This isn't your parents' fault either. This is the culture's fault. I
I
said, look,
know.
you guys are really stressed out because you've got two little babies and you've got a healthcare system that didn't
Yeah.
actually give you parental leave. And
Exactly.
that's not an issue inside of you. That's an issue in the culture.
Yeah. No,
So I'm
exactly.
so on board with that.
Yeah, and I mean, you could go so many things. I mean, just to say to all your listeners, we live in a society in which you have to make a lot of money to have a roof over your head. Like, we are such a nasty, nasty, nasty culture. We not only don't care about your health, and we think you should have to pay a lot of money to when you're sick, but we actually fundamentally think you should have to pay a lot of money to have a roof over your head. Like housing in New York City, I don't care what neighborhood you're talking about. I don't care what city you're talking about. You have to make a lot of money to afford a house over a roof over your head. I mean, that is so brutal. And that's the society we live in. That's a capitalist society. And that is putting certain humans over other humans, because it's saying that if you're rich, you're somehow more human and more deserving of being treated as a human than if you're poor. And that's what I mean by hierarchy of humanists. We have to see that rather than joining sides, oh, I'm on the white supremacy team in terms of disrupting white supremacy, or I'm on the feminist team disrupting patriarchy. Traci, we have to understand that these ideologies are intersectional and they are fundamentally the same ideology. It's about taking a certain group of people and privileging not only those people, but the associated qualities of those people that make no sense. So we value the rational over the irrational. Well, first of all, what? Like, there can be rational emotional feelings, as well as there can be irrational cognitive thinking, right? So that doesn't the split doesn't even make any sense. But the idea that we value the rational over the emotional is a false split. I mean, there's all these false splits we make because we have associated with the people in power a certain set of qualities that we value, and this in a dissociated way. Traci, I say as an insider to you in terms of dissociation. And then the notion is that then we ask people to live in this society and thrive. What? What? Like, what? So the idea is that it's really drawing attention to the fact that there's a fundamental belief system in our society. And again, I don't just mean Americans, although I think Americans have been the main perpetuators of this value system, unfortunately, one of the main, is that if it's premised on certain humans are more deserving of being treated as humans than other humans, and that part of that hierarchy is that certain human qualities and needs, right, are only associated with those on the top. What kind of society is that? What kind of society is that? So we have to see the problem, Traci. And this is what I sort of rant on a lot. And the reason why I'm able to say it so succinctly, quite frankly, is because I've been screaming it on the top of a mountain for a long time. And this is again what the young people teach us, right, or remind us of, is that we have to see the root of the problem. Because if we keep on going back to the problem is really income inequality, or the problem is really climate change, or the climate craziness, or the problem is racism or sexism or homophobia. No, that's a symptom of the problem. That's a symptom of the problem. And so the problem is that we have created a culture that's based on this hierarchy of humanness. And so it's very, very critical that we stop taking the symptom and treating it as if it's the problem, because it's a symptom of a problem. And once we see that it's a symptom of a problem, again, listening to young people who teach us that and how they talk about their lives and what they struggle with, if we see that it's the symptom of the problem, not the problem, then we can fix the problem. Right? Once we see the root of the problem, right, then we can fix it. Then we can do things like, hey, when we gender thinking and feeling, that doesn't make any sense, because we know that all people think and feel. And when you start listening and doing interviews and doing exactly what you're doing on the street corners, you begin to say even more strongly, hey, wait a minute. These binaries don't make any sense. These hierarchical binaries make no sense. They're incoherent. Why do we perpetuate this? And then the question is, rather than just engaging in why do we do it, change it. Change it. Normalize it. I mean, I have to tell you one story, Traci, that's very powerful for most people who hear it. I'm in a classroom, 22 boys of color predominantly, 12-year-old boys in the classroom. I'm at the head of the classroom. I read a quote. I'm going to read a quote. Can I read a quote? Can I read a quote from this book?
Please read a quote. Yep. You're reading from Everyday Courage, yeah?
Okay. I'm reading from Deep Secrets. It's the book, Deep Secrets, Boys, Friendships, and the Crisis of Connection. Okay. So the quote, this is a quote from one of the boys in my research on friendships. And I read it to the 12-year-old boy. So I'm reading it aloud to the boys. So I asked the kid in my research, his name is Justin, that's obviously a pseudonym. And he says, I say, tell me about your friendships. And he says, my best friend and I love each other. That's it. You have this thing that is deep, so deep it's within you. You can't explain it. It's just a thing that you know that person is that person. And that is all that should be important in our friendship. I guess in life, sometimes two people can really, really understand each other and really have a trust, respect, and love for each other. It just happens. It's human nature. And that's Justin at 15 years old. And those kinds of quotes I've heard for now almost 3 decades from young people, from young boys in particular at 13, 14, and 15. So I read the quote and all the boys start to giggle. And I know exactly why they're giggling, because I know exactly the homophobic society we live in. So they all start to giggle and I say, tell me why you're laughing. And they won't tell me. And I said, oh, come on, tell me why you're laughing. And I said, I know why you're laughing, but I want you to tell me. And then one guy says, well, the dude sounds gay. And I said, well, let me tell you, I don't ask kids about their sexuality, so I don't know. But let me tell you that 85% of the boys I speak with I've spoken with over, at that point, it was 25 years, sound like that at some point during their teenage years. That's what they sound like. That's what teenage boys sound like. And all the 12-year-old boys, totally silent. And then one boy says, for real? And I was like, for real? That's what teenage boys sound like. That's really what they sound like. And within 1 second, Traci, it brought tears to my eyes when this happened. The whole classroom, all the boys want to talk about their friendships. They all want to talk like Justin just talked in the quote. And so they start sharing their friendships, their struggles in their friendships. 2 boys in the classroom even admit to have broken up with each other in their friendships because the other boy hurt his feelings. And they talk about it in the class with 22 boys sitting there. And that the only intervention I did, Traci, is I normalized that desire. I normalized it by saying 85, that's what teenage boys sound like. And all of a sudden you had a room full of 12-year-old boys, and if you know 12-year-old boys, but 12-year-old boys who normally are moving around in their seat and they can't quite pay attention. And they're certainly not interested in sitting around talking about emotions. And they're all talking about their friendships. And so it's this whole idea. I mean, it was powerful. And I thought the intervention is I just normalized it. I just said, hey, this isn't weird. This isn't gay. Even though, that's buying into the fact that being gay is a negative thing, obviously is a deeply homophobic belief. But the idea is it's not special to one group of people. It's just a human thing. And then all of a sudden they changed what they were willing to reveal. So I just think that, the message is so powerful to me. It's not hard to change the culture. It's not hard. We do it all the time. We change the culture all the time. We went from Obama to Trump. That was a major cultural change. We're now back to Biden, major cultural change. We have Black Lives Matter. We have the Me Too movement. That's all massive cultural change over the past 5 years. We can totally change the culture. And Traci, as you alluded to before, we already are in many ways toward this more relational framework. We're already starting to get there because we're so isolated and, we've so hit the bottom of the barrel that we're now sort of desperate to actually pay attention to our relational needs. So I just think this whole sense of, when I say change the culture, it sounds like, oh, yikes. How do we change the culture? No. We're doing it all. We're doing it every day. We change the culture. And so the idea is to build a momentum, so that people understand, stop choosing sides about what issue you're most passionate about. Choose the side of, we live in a deeply dehumanizing society, and we express that in all sorts of ways based on race, class, gender, sexuality, religion, you name it, nationality, etc. Whether you're an immigrant, not an immigrant, refugee, not a refugee, etc. It's all the same hierarchy of humanists. We do not want to live in a culture that has a hierarchy of humanists. So how do we begin to build our schools, our workplaces, our homes, our personal lives, our interactions on the street corners, sitting in a chair? How do we begin to create opportunities, right, to see our common humanity, but even more importantly, to disrupt what gets in the way of our humanity? Because if it's just about, this is what I always say to social emotional learning people, if it's just about holding hands and being nice to each other, it's not going to get far, because we're not disrupting the fundamental structure that creates the problem, right? That creates income inequality, that creates homelessness, that creates climate change problem. I mean, the fact that we're not doing anything about it. So the idea is that those are all symptoms of something deeper, and this is what's deeper. So I mean, it's to me, Traci, the message is very optimistic. I'm not giving a pessimistic message. I'm saying we have within ourselves to create the change. We're already beginning to do it. Now let's really come and make it a movement where we say we want to take our culture back to more align with our nature and build healthy, thriving communities.
Woo, lady, I love it. Oh my. And here's what I admire about what you're doing. So I kind of fell into this accidentally, okay? And it just came from an inner sort of shift and probably a little rebellion on my part, because I think I was also that kid that you would have interviewed, right? On some level.
Yeah.
And then I have sons who are very vocal and, they know the language toxic masculinity, for example. And I
Yeah.
said, well, what is toxic masculinity to you? And he said, this is out of when he was 9. He says, toxic masculinity is when a boy on the playground gets smacked in the face with a ball accidentally, and you start to see that he wants to cry and ask for help, but he doesn't, and he acts tough like it really didn't bother him. That's how he defined it. I said, well, I think that's a pretty darn good explanation of toxic
Yeah.
masculinity.
Exactly. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. It's worth writing down. Actually, that's beautiful.
I should do that. But
Yeah.
here's what I admire about what you're doing, because you know, I still don't know exactly what we're doing at Sidewalk Talk. We're disrupting on the sidewalk, and I always tell people I don't want to just have an app where people call in because they're lonely. That's not what we're about. We're about
Yeah.
disrupting the culture. When you're walking down the sidewalk, you're usually doing something and going somewhere, and I'm saying no. We're here to connect, not to do something or go somewhere. I love,
Yeah.
though, that you're getting these kids young with the listening project. So I believe that you're starting, but I think it's kind of growing beyond the middle school classroom. So would you be willing to say more about the listening project? And
Yeah.
I really want to know what
Yeah.
transformative interviewing is.
Yeah. No, I mean, basically, and a lot of the premises are stuff you're already doing on the street corner. So first of all, I want to start. I talk through stories just like you do, Traci. So I want to tell you a quick story that led to the listening project in part, even though it was mostly the research that we did with boys. But it also started with my son when he was 5. I was going through a divorce with his dad, and I was very conscious about not making the home climate too depressing. So I didn't want to always be sort of a sad quality to the home environment. So I remember, and you have to remember that he's 5. So I come home from work, I come in the apartment, he's sitting at the table eating something, and I say to him with a big smile on my face, I say, "Hi, Raphael, how was your day? How are you doing?" And he looks at me, and within a second, he looks at me and he says, "Mommy, why would you smile when you're feeling sad?" And I thought, oh my God, oh my God. Basically what he was saying at 5 years old is, why are you faking an emotion? Why are you faking an emotion? And that story, when that happened, was the first time it hit me that it's not just about friendships among boys, or it's about, they're not, it's not just about the kinds of things that I've been writing about for decades. It's actually deeper. It's that as humans, we have extraordinary emotional acuity. We read the emotional world and we see the contradiction in unbelievable ways. What animal besides humans could say, "Why are you smiling when you're feeling sad?" Meaning the understanding of faking an emotion, right? And at 5. And then what we do, Traci, is we smash it right out of you, because we don't value that quality of knowing. We don't nurture it in the schools. We nurture intellectual curiosity, not interpersonal curiosity, right? We don't actually encourage that curiosity. In fact, we say things like curiosity killed the cat. So we actually think interpersonal curiosity is gossiping, it's trash talk, it's stuff that's not made for school. That school is about intellectual curiosity, not interpersonal curiosity. Anyway, so with that understanding and seeing my son and then my daughter saying amazing things as well about, who believes in gender stereotypes, she told me at 9. And then when I said, well, that's a great question, who believes in gender stereotypes? We were talking about math stereotypes with girls. And then she said, why do we believe in things we know aren't true? And another question, 9-year-old girl saying, why do we believe in things that aren't true? And just another profound question that we do in our culture. We believe in things that we know are not true. And so the idea is that knowing that young people know things and they're connected to things. And I wrote a paper once called "Is Growing Up Good for Your Health?" And the answer was no, because growing up, no, really, because growing up in this culture makes you stupid. You disconnect from what you know about the contradictions in the world. I have a niece that said at 8 years old, "Why do girls catch the ball in the outfield saying, 'I think I got it,' and boys say, 'I got it'?" She said, "What, Aunt Niobe? Why do the girls do that?" And so the idea is they see things, they recognize it, they see emotions, they see the contradiction, they ask why, the 2-year-old why, that we shut them down with that curiosity. We basically said it's not appropriate, or I don't know the answer, and enough of the questions already. So we grow up and we become dumb, and we go underground with actually what we know about the world, and then we act dumb in terms of how we treat each other. So the listening project is very much premised on engaging with. I've been teaching methods to doctoral students for decades. And I've been teaching a method that we have now called Transformative Interviewing. It's a method that was co-developed with a former doctoral student of mine who's now a professor at Swarthmore, Joseph Nelson, and Crystal Clark, who's also now leads PACH and leads the listening project. And we've been developing this method that's really comes out of teaching methods to doctoral students, but we've been doing with middle school students for the past 5 years. And now we're in many, many middle schools across New York City. And I'll tell you where else we are in a second. But the idea is that we train young people in the method of transformative interviewing, that is a method that comes from learning how to listen to yourself and listen to another person in ways that sees the self and the other outside of a set of stereotypes. So the problem is not just that I stereotype you, Traci, and you stereotype me. It's that we stereotype ourselves, because these stereotypes infuse our own identities. So boys, for example, even though your son is able to say that at 9, whether he likes it or not, he is getting infused with a sense of his own identity based on those stereotypes. So the idea is that the listening is about, for example, I'll give you an example. So listening, we reimagine listening. Listening is not about just, when you ask 7th graders what listening looks like, they go, they just put their mouth shut. They don't say anything, right? They think that's listening. And I said, well, actually, oftentimes that listening is just spacing out, right? And waiting for your turn to talk. So I said, basically, it's not oftentimes really listening. And then I'll say, well, what does listening sound like? And they'll go, what? What are you talking about? Listening doesn't sound like anything. And I'll say, no. What does it sound like? And they'll finally get it. And I'll say it's about asking follow-up questions. It's asking clarifying questions. It's asking someone, so then what happened? So then how did you feel then? And then what happened? And then, et cetera. And that's when people report feeling listened to. When someone's asking a lot of what we call curated follow-up questions, so that someone actually feels listened to. And then the other thing is that what are the questions you're asking? When you ask a homeless person just about being homeless, that's actually keeping them in a stereotype that all they have to offer is the experience of being homeless. When you ask a homeless person about their first time they fell in love or their best friend when they were in 8th grade, you all of a sudden, your questions are literally allowing them to experience themselves and you to experience them outside of a set of stereotypes about what their worth is in the world. And the same with Black kids and Latino kids and Asian kids, et cetera. When you ask them not just simply about their race or ethnicity, et cetera, or you ask white kids about their race, right, and how their race shapes how they see themselves, you allow them to see themselves outside of a set of rigid stereotypes about who they are. So the idea is that the questions that you ask actually creates a kind of listening that feels that you feel listened to, which is critical. The second term is that we reimagine is curiosity. We need both interpersonal and intellectual curiosity, and in fact, Traci, we argue one is intersectional with the other. I can ask you, Traci, about the history of, I don't know what your family history is, but I can ask you about your family history back 500 years. That's intellectual history. And then I can ask you, situated in that family history, that's interpersonal history, right? Curiosity. So that's intellectual curiosity and interpersonal curiosity. We need both in the classroom. We need to be asking questions about where your parents came from and their story and the story of the teacher and where the teacher and this teacher's experience and her relationships and how it shapes her teaching thing. I mean, all sorts of interpersonal questions need to be in the classroom because that sparks our intellectual curiosity and ultimately it builds connection. At the root of all good connection, Traci, we found in our research is interpersonal curiosity. You can't have good relationships if you're not curious about the other person. So the idea is nurturing interpersonal curiosity in the students who are being trained. And then the final thing is learning and connection, actually, which is the notion of learning is always, this is the screwed up thing about schools. Learning is always about you give me information and then I learn it. It's very passive. If education became actually learning the answers to my own questions by listening to your experiences of something, right? So the idea is that the listening project and transformative interviewing is all about tell me your deep, thick questions, and then tell me who you're going to interview to learn the answer to your question by listening to their experiences of whatever topic you're interested in. And you're going to learn about it, and it's going to transform you because you will have learned something about yourself from listening to somebody else. And so I'll give you an example. There's a young guy, I didn't mean to say little, all kids hate when I refer to them as kids either, as well. So a young person, I be sensitive, a young person in 7th grade, I won't say his name, it doesn't matter, I'm working with him right now. He's in a classroom at the school that I work in at the moment. And he sort of presents as sort of a tough kid. He doesn't show his face on Zoom. He has on his image, it's some sort of fighting character on his image that you see. You don't see his face. I go around the room and I say, tell me I explain what thick questions are, your questions that you carry around in your life. And I said, tell me your thick question. You're going to interview people around that question. Okay. So it has to be a question that you really want to ask for the next few weeks because we're going to be focused on that question, you getting the answer to your own question, for listening to another person. So this kid, let's call him Stephen. Stephen says, it's Stephen's turn, and I think Stephen's going to give something. I assume I stereotype him, right? I assume he's going to give some kind of question like, "What's your favorite sports team?" or something that doesn't reveal himself. And he says something, and I can't hear him. And I said, Stephen, can you speak up a little bit? And he goes, and then he repeats it again. And then I still can't quite hear him. And then someone sort of yells at him in the class and says, you have to put your microphone near your mouth or else we can't hear you, And so I think, oh my God, now he's been shamed. Now it's going to be like impossible to get him to say his question. So I said, so Stephen, what's your question that you carry around with you in your life that you really want to know the answer to by listening to another person? And he says in this very, very quiet voice, he says, what is it like to feel safe? And I said, can you hear me? He said, what is it like to feel safe? And he said,
I can hear you. I'm just touching I'm like, oh.
I know. And he said, I want to know where they feel safe and what it feels like. And I was like, literally, and I just thought, oh my God, here is Stephen, Mr. Cool Kid, Mr. I will not show my face, I will not engage. And then his question is, where do you feel safe? And he spends the next 2 weeks interviewing his peers and his parents around where they feel safe and asking curated questions and getting the answer to his own questions. And that is the listening project. And that we do this, it's an 8-week, 6 to 8 week curriculum in English classes. It's having profound effects, according to our research, on deepening connection, a sense of a common humanity, empathy, curiosity, obviously, listening skills, obviously. And now we're doing it in after school programs across New York City. We're now we're trying to train the entire NYU faculty, administrators, students in the listening project. David Brooks from the New York Times took our listening project workshop on transformative interviewing. I've been approached by big corporations like Amazon to train their employees in this approach. And so it's a very powerful method to essentially, Traci, reconnect ourselves with ourselves and with each other by learning from another person, by listening, right? In terms of we even talk about interrupting as a core part of listening at times for clarification, and then nourishing that beautiful interpersonal curiosity that we have naturally. And when you get doctoral students to interview 7th graders, which do you think are better interviewers? The doctoral students who have been rigorously trained, or the 7th graders in the first part of their training? Which is
No, the
better?
7th graders for sure. They don't have all the baggage. The 7th graders for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, the 7th graders interview the doctoral students. The doctoral students are blown away by their skills. And they're like, where'd they get those skills? And I said, well, first of all, they were a little bit scaffolded by our team. But more importantly, those are just human skills. So when boys interview me, they have to interview me as part of a classroom assignment. They ask questions like, Traci, and I kid you not, these are the questions that come out of 12-year-olds. Group of boys, again, group of boys. I work in a bunch of boys' schools at the moment. So a group of boys, their question is, first of all, I tell them I'm divorced. They ask me their very first question, do you still love him? Do you still love him? Is their first question. Does he know that you still love him? How do you show that you still love him? How did you support your kids when you got divorced? How the kids support you when you got divorced? And you have to imagine these boys are like raising their hand, trying to be called on to ask their question of me. And the whole room, I have tears in my eyes in this conversation because I can't believe the depth of their questions. And they're listening with their bodies are not moving and they're leaning in. And it's 25 boys leaning in, 12-year-old boys leaning and listening to some, white lady that's probably the age of their grandmothers, talk about love with her ex-husband. I mean, that's what you get when you open up humans' interpersonal curiosity. You get humans,
Man,
rather than stereotypes of
I am
12-year-olds.
so into this.
Yeah.
You need to have like Lisa Ling's program come videotape this so we could change the whole. I know you're getting lots of calls and you're blowing this up, right? This is gonna go
Yeah.
everywhere, right?
Yeah, I want to with you. And Traci, I want your thing to also go everywhere. So I think that we have to figure out some way where you're on the
I think we have
corner.
to join forces in some way.
Oh, really? I mean, I'm serious, Traci. I think we have to figure out. I love the out in the public outside, and I'm inside. and you start to disrupt both inside and outside. I do the disruption inside, you do the disruption outside, but that I think there's some really interesting possibilities there of doing some. I mean, I'd love actually is a show that show you what you're doing and what we're doing, and then linking them together. You know what I mean? Because I just think that
Well,
we got to create this.
since we're daydreaming, can I share? Can I tell
Yeah,
you the big dream? I want
yeah.
I want listening stations with directions on how to do it as permanent installations on every major city thoroughfare. Like in San Francisco, they're changing Market Street into a no car zone. And I'm like, I would like to have a setup of listening chairs. And then I also have recently talked to, I think museum spaces are oftentimes spaces for the elites. And I'd like to have museum spaces be spaces for community. And I'd like to have listening chairs in the foyers of every museum where you can sit down and talk about and be curious about the impact of that museum experience on the museum goers, where anyone can just plop down. And we've done this before at conferences where I set up our chairs and I had little signs made about the instructions. If you're going to sit in this chair as a listener, you're just going to sit here and wait until
Yeah,
someone sits down and wants to share their story with you. And I
yeah.
come out from a conference session, Niobe, and every chair was full of people sitting, waiting, being willing to listen to a stranger. It was incredible. And
Wow.
so I'm sorry, I'm
Wow.
catching the
That's
bug.
good.
I'm getting
No, no,
excited.
but there's another. Okay, so Traci, at another point, but I am trying to create this because I'm too old to now do things small. Like I'm too old, so I need to be at this point in my life. And Traci, I'm sure you feel the same way. At this point, you know, I got half my life lived. Hopefully, I have another good chunk of my life. Hopefully, but the idea is that okay, now we need to make this big. We need to come together, work collectively. No more individual organizations at one at a time. You have to blend. You have to bring together organizations. I'm trying to very much create this national campaign with multiple organizations. So Traci, you guys are definitely a part of this to create actually a national strategy of how to address the crisis of connection. And so it becomes a national strategy where we're doing things in all our cities and our towns and our small villages and this, and eventually, because there's a lot of requests from outside of the states too. I mean, in fact, there's lots of interest in what we're doing outside. We do some work in Ethiopia. We do some work in United Arab Emirates because I teach over in Abu Dhabi. And anyway, so I just think that we have to work collectively, Traci. So fist bump.
Yeah, totally. And I'm with you. And I just met a guy here in Germany and he asked for my help and I'm sort of quasi on their founding board called the Togetherness Hub, where he's actually bringing together an international consortium around loneliness, although they're now changing it to human connection. So of
Good,
course I will make that introduction. And I think
good.
all your peers that you already, but they're bringing together some folks from the Japanese government and Israeli government all over the world. It's
Yeah, and it has
but
to be.
you have the
No,
science behind it. You're not just the
yeah,
feel good piece. You've got all the
yeah,
science and you're
yeah,
starting to
yeah,
study because we can have all these nice ideas. And that's what I hope to do is eventually start studying what the impact of Sidewalk Talk is. But I really what I hear you saying is that it's time for you to leave a legacy in the culture. You have all these close, intimate, heart centered connections with these boys. And I can only imagine being in your shoes that you feel indebted to them to
yeah.
somehow change the world within which they're coming up and to and on behalf of your own children, your own
Yeah,
son.
absolutely. This is the thing. So because I'm actually I've always been a reader, and because I'm a hardcore empiricist, meaning everything I say comes out of data. It's not I'm not interested in just sharing opinions. Um, is I feel a responsibility as an adult because I feel like if you look at the research, you look at the body of research over the entire 20th century and into the 21st century, you have studies in 1905 showing that boys and girls want friendships in which you can share deep secrets. Farm boys in Illinois in 1905, thousands of them, talked about how much they want emotionally intimate friendships in 1905. So I'm just saying, if we have evidence from the science over the 20th century and into the 21st century that humans need each other and we thrive in relationship with each other. And when we don't have that, we get lonely, we get sick, we die, We get all sorts of diseases. We get colds. We know that connection is linked to being healthy, physically healthy, and we don't respond to it, Traci, then are you kidding me? We're not being a human. So we have an enormous amount of knowledge, and I've called this in a new book I'm writing for Harvard University Press called The Science of Human Connection. And it tells the 5-part story, but not just from the young people, because it's the young people that are telling the story that I heard it from, but it's in the larger body of science. It's in the social psychology, social neuroscience, anthropology, biology, primatology, sociology. I mean, it's in those sciences that tell us that 5-part story. Nobody sees it as a 5-part story. You know the parable about the blind men who all touch different parts of the elephant, but they don't see that it's an elephant? That's the parable of the sciences. We're all divided into different disciplines, and we don't see the larger problem. And the larger problem is the elephant in the room, literally, is the crisis of connection that's caused by these facts that these disciplines are not talking to each other. So they actually talk to each other and tell a 5-part story called I'm calling The Science of Human Connection, which is about who we are as human, what gets in the way, what leads to a crisis of connection, and then the consequences and the solution. It's also in this book that I don't need to show because it's a podcast, but it's in my Crisis of Connection book too, that I came out with Pedro Noguera and Alicia Ali and Carol Gilligan. But the idea is that,
I mean, that is an action-packed book of so much
yeah,
good science, and I cannot say for anyone
yeah,
in this field that is the book they need to own for sure.
yeah, yeah. And I just say, all I'm saying is that it is a result of over a century of knowledge in the sciences and in the practice, right? Science and practice has told us the same thing for over a century. So if any adult out there is listening, doesn't feel responsibility to create a more humane, just and humane world, shame on you. Because we have known this for a long time. We know exactly why we ended up electing Trump. We know exactly why we're in such a mess with hate crimes, and why police violence has against Black people hasn't changed for hundreds of years. We know exactly why the status of women is still so screwed up. Gay people, Muslim people. I mean, you could go on and on and on. We know exactly why. And now the question is using the knowledge, using the science to begin to disrupt this, and to come together to create a more humane, just and humane culture. So I would say, yes, I feel a responsibility, Traci. I absolutely do. But I think I really want, as with you, I want everyone to feel the responsibility, because that's the only way we're going to change, is that for the future generation, for ourselves, for the future generations, listening to what we've learned over a century by listening to young people. You have it even in The Catcher in the Rye in the 1940s, in the book Native Son by Richard Wright in the 1940s. They tell the same story, that their humanity is rooted in their desire for relationships. And then when they live in a racist or patriarchal culture, and culture, that then disrupts their ability to find what they need. And in Bigger Thomas's case, in Native Son, he commits, acts of violence. And in Catcher in the Rye, for those of you who don't remember it, he ends up just isolating himself, because essentially he can't find people who are not phony, which is that desire for real people, real authentic conversations. So you get it in fiction, you get it in the science, you get it in the practice. Shut up and listen, right? I mean, just shut up and listen. And then you understand the root of the problem and the solutions. And now it's all of our responsibility to move forward and to use what we know in ourselves, as well as what we know about others, to act and to create a world in which we're not dying at such incredibly high rates of suicide, that we're not killing each other through opiate addiction, that we're not, all the kinds of things, having enormous homelessness problems in the richest city in the world, New York City, or one of the richest cities. Basically, those kinds of things should be intolerable for us, because we have the capacity to do something, much better and much more humane and just. And so I want to encourage every listener to begin to act in your own life to transform how we treat each other, how we see ourselves, and how we treat ourselves and each other.
Well, I love how you almost answered that last sort of question that we ask as our closer, but I'll ask you again. I know we're at the end of time and I could go on and on, but I just think this is the beginning for us. So I'm not going
Yeah.
to fret about that.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I will give you another opportunity. Again, there's just so much I want to say. I'm so on board with everything you're saying. Um, but there are these people around the world that do this work, sometimes sitting in the cold, sometimes sitting in the rain, on sidewalks with loud buses going by, people looking at them like they're strange, weird people. Like, why are you just to listen? And they don't get it until they sometimes come out. And we actually have homeless folks that don't have homes that come listen alongside of us. Like, we're all equals in this project together.
Yeah, it's
What
nice.
might you want to say to them as our way to part ways today in this conversation? What would you want to
Yeah.
offer to our listeners around the world, either advice or words of wisdom, Niobe?
Well, I think it's to really start from the place that we're born human, and to connect to what we know, what you as an individual know about your own humanity, and to start from that place of that someone who robs and steals and rapes and kills was not born that way. So if we understand that nobody's born that way, we become that way as a result of something happens. The question not is how do we punish that person, but how do we understand what happened so that it doesn't happen again? Right? So that we have to change our starting point. There's a beautiful story about two women meet on the corner, and one woman says, "How do I get to Grand Central Station?" And the other woman says, "Well, if I wanted to get there, I wouldn't start from here." So you can't start from where we're starting from, right? You can't start from the premise that we are nasty, naturally nasty, beastly human beings that need institutions to behave ourselves. You have to start from the premise of we are naturally, and Darwin says this too, by the way, we are naturally morally good, and that we are social animals, and that we start from that place, and that we need to nurture that place of we are naturally moral animals and also social animals, moral and social, and we start from that place, and then we begin to build a culture that nurtures that lovely, amazing, extraordinary capacity to connect to ourselves and each other and to treat each other in moral ways. And so that's what we need to go back to. And then we lead our lives with that knowledge, holding on to that knowledge in everything we do, in every single thing we do, that we are naturally moral and social human beings, and we can bring that out in anyone.
Beautiful. I just led a couples listening circle last night. It's a 12-week circle. And what you just said, we said, look, listening is not a skill, it's a
Yeah.
value. And you're going to bring
Yeah.
this value everywhere you go. And that's what I hear you saying. You're saying,
Yeah.
community, wake up and bring this everywhere. Live this every day.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. And think of it in some ways, think about that young people are saying, really looking up to us and saying, what's wrong with you people? I mean, that's literally what they're saying in novels, in the research, in our fiction, in our movies. Rebel Without a Cause is actually Rebel with a Cause. That's the name of my other book. And the idea is they're saying, what's wrong with you people, meaning you adults, that you've created a culture that is so out of sync with our nature. And so at some level, respond to that call, that demand of implicit in that question, what's wrong with you people? And so it is absolutely going back to that notion that listening is a value. Learning, we got to reimagine those concepts though. Listening is not just simply about shutting up. It's about actually engaging with people around their questions, learning from someone else about the answers to your own questions, valuing interpersonal curiosity, seeing connection not just as connecting on social media, but actually on allowing someone to feel seen and heard and listened to as a critical part of a connection. And then hopefully the person that's mutual. So that's when a genuine, thick connection happens. So it really is reimagining, starting from a different place. That's where I want to leave it, Traci. We need to start from a place of humanity, right? And who we are as humans in order for us to get to a more just and humane place. And until we start from that new place, we're never going to get there.
I love this. Thank you so much for being here with us. And for everyone that's listening in, there are a whole host of show notes below the podcast episode where you can find information about Niobe, about her research, about PACH, about her books. And you're going to find all kinds, you're going to go down the rabbit hole and become a real activist for human connection, I assure you, as soon as you start digging into Niobe and some of her students and some of her co-conspirators' work. So thank you for the work you do in the world, for being an inspiration to me. You've been a hero of mine for a long, long time, and it's a real, real honor. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. This is such a great interview. I so enjoyed it. And Traci, you are just such an inspiration. I'm so delighted to be interviewed by someone doing the kind of work you're doing. It's just so gorgeous. So thank you, Traci.
Thank you. Thank you for being here and listening to this episode of the Sidewalk Talk podcast. If you like what you heard, tell your friends, tell your family, like and comment on the podcast publisher that you're listening from, and subscribe. This will help us get the word out about changing our culture to one of connection.